There are places that feel completely different after midnight. The fluorescent lights hum louder, the shadows sit heavier, and the silence, the kind of silence you only get when the rest of the world is asleep. It starts playing tricks on you. You hear things that aren't there. You see movement where nothing moved. And sometimes, just sometimes, you realize that the sound you've been dismissing all night was never the building settling. It was someone breathing. These are 3 true stories from people who learn the hard way that some night shifts come with dangers that aren't listed in the job description. Before we get into the first story, if you enjoy this kind of content, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button. Most of you watching right now aren't subscribed, and it takes 1 second. Also, drop a like on this video. It helps more than you'd think. All right, let's begin.
The gas station.
I used to work the graveyard shift at a gas station off Route 9 in southern New Jersey. If you've never been to that part of the state, picture flat, empty roads cutting through pine forests that stretch for miles in every direction. The station sat at the intersection of 2 county roads that nobody used after sundown. On a good night, I'd maybe see 15 customers between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. On a bad night, I'd see 2. This was a bad night. I was 22 at the time and desperately needed money for tuition. The pay was terrible, $11 an hour, but the shifts were long enough that it added up. Plus, I could study between customers, which was the only reason I hadn't quit already. My routine was always the same. Clock in at 11, restock the coolers, mop the floors, then sit behind the counter with my textbook until somebody pulled in for gas or cigarettes. The station had a small office behind the register with a desk, a mini fridge, and 4 security monitors showing grainy black and white feeds. 1 for the parking lot, 1 for the pump islands, 1 for the side of the building, and 1 for the back door. I checked those monitors maybe once an hour on a normal night. This was not going to be a normal night. It was raining, not a heavy downpour, but a steady, miserable drizzle that turned the parking lot into a sheet of reflected light. I remember the sound of it hitting the metal awning above the pumps. It had this rhythm to it that was almost hypnotic. By 1 in the morning, I hadn't had a single customer. I was deep into my chemistry notes when something on one of the security monitors caught my eye. The camera covering the side of the building showed a person standing at the edge of the frame, just standing there in the rain, with no umbrella, no hood, facing the wall of the building, not moving. I figured it was a drunk or someone who'd wandered off from one of the Pine Barrens trails and gotten lost. It happens more than you'd think out there. I watched the monitor for about 30 seconds, waiting for the person to move. They didn't, not a single inch. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and walked to the side door. Looking back, I should have just called the police right then, but I was young and had that stupid invincibility complex most 22-year-olds seem to have. I pushed the door open and the cold air hit me immediately. I pointed the flashlight toward the spot where I'd seen the person on the monitor. No one was there, just wet concrete and the edge of the tree line, about 40 feet away. I scanned the area for a moment, then headed back inside and locked the door behind me. I figured they must have walked off while I was making my way over. I sat back down at the counter and glanced at the monitors. My stomach dropped. The person was back. Same exact spot, same position, facing the wall. Only now their head was tilted slightly to the side, like they were listening to something. I picked up the store phone and called the non-emergency line. The dispatcher told me she'd send a patrol unit when one was available, but it could be up to 40 minutes, given how far out I was. 40 minutes. I hung up and kept my eyes locked on the monitor. For the next 10 minutes, the figure didn't move. Then something changed. They turned around. I couldn't make out details on the grainy feed, just a dark shape now facing the camera instead of the wall. They stood like that for another minute, and then they started walking, not toward the front of the building or the parking lot. They walked directly toward the camera, which was mounted right next to the side door I had just used. My heart was hammering. I watched them get closer and closer to the lens until their face filled the entire frame. Even on the grainy feed, I could tell something was deeply wrong. Their eyes were wide open, unnaturally wide, and they were grinning, not a normal smile. It looked forced, like someone was pulling the corners of their mouth apart with invisible hooks. They stared directly into the camera for what felt like forever. 15 seconds maybe, then the feed cut to static. I jumped out of my chair and ran to the side door. Locked, front door, locked, back door, locked. Every entrance was secure. I went back to the monitors. The side camera was still static. The other 3 feeds were fine and showed nothing unusual. Empty parking lot, empty pump islands. Nothing at the back door but the dumpster and the tree line. I was about to sit back down when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not on the door, on the large plate glass window right next to it. I looked up and saw a figure standing on the other side of the glass. The overhead lights from the awning were casting a glare that made it impossible to see their face. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The figure raised one hand and pressed it flat against the window. Then the other hand, both palms against the glass, and then they leaned in, close enough that their forehead was nearly touching the surface, and I finally saw the face clearly. Same grin, same impossibly wide eyes. They mouthed something. I couldn't hear it through the glass, and I couldn't read their lips in the dim light, but their mouth moved slowly and deliberately, like they wanted me to see every single syllable. Then they stepped back and disappeared around the right side of the building, the same side where the camera was still showing static. I didn't move from behind that counter for the next 35 minutes. When the police cruiser finally pulled in, the officer did a full sweep of the building and the perimeter. There was no one. No footprints in the mud near the tree line. No handprints on the glass, even though I watched this person press both palms flat against it. Nothing. The side camera started working again on its own about an hour later. I reviewed the footage, and the entire segment of the figure was gone. The feed jumped from an empty frame straight to static with nothing in between. I put in my 2 weeks the next morning. People have told me it was probably just someone on drugs messing around. Others say it might have been someone casing the station for a robbery. I've considered both explanations, and neither one accounts for the footage being completely wiped. I still don't have an answer, and I've stopped looking for one.
The warehouse.
This happened when I was 26. I was working as a night shift inventory clerk at a massive distribution warehouse outside of Columbus, Ohio. The building was enormous. Over 300,000 square feet of concrete floor, metal shelving that went up 30 feet high, and row after row of aisles that all looked exactly the same. During the day, the place was crawling with workers, forklifts buzzing around, managers shouting, trucks backing into loading docks every few minutes. But at night, between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., the entire building was staffed by exactly 3 people. Me, a forklift operator named Dale, and a security guard named Marcus, who mostly sat in the front booth watching videos on his phone. My job was simple. Walk the aisles with a handheld scanner, check inventory counts against the system, and flag anything that didn't match. Boring, repetitive work, but it paid well for the area. The thing about warehouse night shifts is you get used to the silence And then you start to depend on it. Any sound that breaks it hits differently. A box falling off a shelf 3 aisles away sounds like a gunshot. The building groaning under temperature changes sounds like footsteps. You learn to filter it out. Or at least, I thought I had. If you're finding these stories unsettling, that probably means you've got good instincts. Leave a comment and let me know which story is creeping you out the most so far. Now back to the warehouse. About 4 months into the job, things started getting strange. It began small. I'd be deep in one of the back aisles scanning barcodes, and I'd hear what sounded like someone dragging a pallet across the floor somewhere behind me. I'd radio Dale to ask if he was nearby. He'd tell me he was on the complete opposite end of the building. I'd chalk it up to the building being old and move on. Then one night, I found something that made me genuinely uncomfortable. I was scanning a section in the far back corner of the warehouse, an area we called dead stock because it was all old product that hadn't moved in months. Nobody had any reason to be back there. Between 2 pallets of shrink-wrapped boxes, I found a sleeping bag, a gallon jug of water, and a pile of empty food wrappers. Someone had been living in the warehouse. I radioed Marcus immediately. He came back to look at it and agreed it was bad. He called our site manager, who told us to leave everything in place and said he'd review camera footage in the morning and contact police if necessary. Marcus and I went back to our posts, and I tried to continue like normal, but I could not shake the feeling that whoever set up that little camp was still in the building. The warehouse was so massive and so packed with hiding spots that a person could live in there for weeks without being discovered, especially if they'd figured out the night crew's patterns. 2 hours after finding the sleeping bag, I was in aisle 47 when I heard breathing. Not the ventilation system, not the hum of the emergency lights. Human breathing. Slow and rhythmic, coming from the other side of the shelving unit, right next to me. I froze. I turned off my scanner and just listened. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, steady and calm, like whoever it was either didn't know I was there or didn't care. I slowly backed out of the aisle, keeping my eyes on the shelving the entire time. When I reached the end, I turned the corner to check the adjacent aisle. Empty, but the breathing was still there, still coming from somewhere between the shelves. And that's when it hit me. The person wasn't in the next aisle. They were on the shelving unit, lying flat on one of the upper levels, 15 or 20 feet above the floor, hidden behind boxes, breathing, watching me from above the entire time. I didn't run. I walked, quickly and deliberately. I radioed Dale and told him to meet me at the front immediately. He could hear it in my voice and didn't ask a single question. The 3 of us, me, Dale, and Marcus, stood in the front office for the remaining 4 hours of the shift. Nobody went back out onto that floor. When the morning crew arrived, our site manager showed up with 2 police officers. They found the sleeping bag exactly where I'd left it. They also found 3 more makeshift camps set up in different sections of the warehouse, all in dead stock areas with minimal camera coverage. Whoever had been staying there had multiple spots and rotated between them. The security cameras caught something too. On the footage from that night, at around 3:15 a.m., a figure could be seen climbing down from a top shelf in aisle 47 and walking calmly toward the back of the building. He exited through a fire door that had been propped open with a piece of cardboard jammed into the latch. Police identified him through fingerprints on the water jug. A 38-year-old man with a history of trespassing and breaking and entering. He had been living in that warehouse for over 2 months. 2 full months of me walking those aisles every night, completely unaware that someone was lying 10 feet above my head in the dark. The company installed alarms on every fire door after that and hired a second security guard. I stayed at the job another year, but I never once walked those back aisles without looking up.
The hotel.
I worked the front desk at a small independent hotel in upstate Vermont for almost 2 years. It was one of those old converted mansions that had been turned into a boutique hotel sometime in the 80s, the kind of place that leaned heavily into its history and charm. Creaky hardwood floors, antique furniture, oil paintings of landscapes lining every hallway. 23 rooms, a small dining area, and a basement used for storage and laundry. During peak season, the hotel was usually about half full, which still meant the night shift was incredibly quiet. Off-season, I'd sometimes go entire shifts without seeing a single guest. The front desk sat in the main foyer, right at the base of the grand staircase. From my chair, I could see the main entrance, the staircase going up, and a long hallway leading to the first floor rooms. Behind me was a door to the back office, which connected to the kitchen and eventually the basement stairs. No elevators, just the main staircase and a narrow service stairwell at the far end of the building. My manager Helen had been running the place for over a decade. She was up front with me from the start. She told me the hotel had quirks, doors that wouldn't stay latched, radiators that clanked at random hours, a motion sensor light on the second floor that triggered for no apparent reason. She said it was all just the building being old. I had no reason not to believe her. For 6 months, the night shifts were totally uneventful. Check in the occasional late arrival, handle a noise complaint, spend the rest of my time reading. Then November came, and the hotel emptied out. On the night it happened, there were exactly 2 occupied rooms in the entire building. Room 4 on the first floor, an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, and room 17 on the second floor, a man who had checked in that afternoon and requested no housekeeping for his entire stay. I thought that was a little odd, but people have their preferences. He booked 5 nights and paid in advance with cash, which Helen had approved over the phone. Around 1:30 in the morning, I was reading a novel at the front desk when the motion sensor light on the second floor hallway triggered. I knew because there was an indicator panel behind the desk that showed which sensors were active. It happened occasionally, just like Helen warned, so I didn't think much of it. The light stayed on about 2 minutes, then clicked off. 15 minutes later, it triggered again. Then again, 10 minutes after that. 3 triggers in under half an hour was unusual, but I figured it was the guest in 17, stepping out for ice or something. Then, at exactly 2:14 a.m., the phone at the desk rang. The display showed room 4, the elderly couple. I picked up, and the woman on the other end was whispering so quietly I had to press the phone hard against my ear. She told me someone was trying to get into their room. She said they'd been woken by the sound of their door handle being slowly turned back and forth, and that it had been going on for several minutes. I told her to keep the door locked and that I was coming immediately. I grabbed the master key and walked quickly down the first floor hallway. When I got to room 4, the hallway was empty. No one near the door. I knocked gently and identified myself. The husband opened the door, just a crack. He was pale. He told me the handle had stopped moving about a minute before I arrived. I checked the door from outside. No scratches, no signs of anything forced. I told them it was most likely a confused guest who mistook their room and I'd look into it. They didn't seem convinced, but they locked up again. Walking back to the desk, I felt deeply uneasy. There were only 2 occupied rooms in the hotel. If the man in room 17 had somehow come downstairs and tried their door, That was a bizarre mistake considering the rooms were on completely different floors. I sat down and stared at the indicator panel. The second floor motion sensor was off, meaning nobody was moving around up there. About 20 minutes later, I heard something that made every hair on my body stand on end. Footsteps, not from upstairs, not from the hallway. They were coming from behind me, from the back office. The door between the front desk and the back office was closed, and on the other side of it, someone was walking. The footsteps were slow and heavy, crossing the office floor toward the door. I stared at the handle. It began to turn. Slowly, exactly the way the elderly couple had described. I didn't wait. I ran straight out the front entrance and into the parking lot. I called the police from my cell phone. They arrived in about 12 minutes, which felt like an hour. 2 officers went inside while I stayed by the cruiser. They cleared the first floor, the second floor, and the basement. The back office was empty. The kitchen was empty. But the basement door, which I know for a fact I had locked at the start of my shift, was wide open. And one of the narrow basement windows at ground level had been pried open from outside. Officers found muddy shoe prints on the basement floor, leading from the window to the stairs. The prints went up through the kitchen and into the back office. They stopped at the office door, the exact door I had been sitting on the other side of. The guest in room 17 was gone. His room was empty. The bed had been slept in, but his belongings had vanished. He'd left through the service stairwell at the far end of the building, which exited to a side door that was found propped open. The elderly couple checked out that morning. So did I. Helen tried to convince me to stay, promising better locks and a real security system. But I was finished. Police never identified the man from room 17. He gave a fake name at check-in. The security cameras that Helen always claimed were operational turned out to have been broken for months. The cash he paid with was real but untraceable. They found nothing in the room except one detail that still keeps me up at night. On the notepad on the bedside table, someone had written a single number, 23, the exact number of rooms in the hotel. I don't know what that number meant, but I know what it felt like to sit at that desk and hear those footsteps coming from behind me, getting closer, and to watch that door handle begin to turn. That feeling alone was enough to make me swear off night shifts for the rest of my life. Those were 3 true night shift horror stories. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If you've had your own terrifying experience working alone after dark, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments. The best ones might end up in a future video. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And do me one last favor. Share this video with someone who works night shifts. They need to hear these. Stay safe out there, especially after dark.